Cycle Update. See, I told you, the cologne scented book wasn't going to cut it, folks. CryptoTalk.fm, my name is Leicester. I am your host. I stumbled across, again, I tend to do this on the weekend. I stumbled across a very interesting post that is in response to an incident that happened a while ago. And I'm going to briefly talk about the incident. I didn't do deep coverage on the incident because in one of my older episodes, I said everything like it's a matter when the leash from the Shib ecosystem, the leash started printing out of control. I was one of the first to do the coverage about the supply having increased and the message that came out somewhere that claimed it was a one-time 10% increase and that not that it was increasing 10% per day. Well, that's been debunked. Leash was printing out of control. We're now in the billions of tokens on Leash when at one point it only had 100,000 tokens. It's printing out of control. And so I did that high level and was one of the first to talk about this. Tells me it's a matter of time because Leash and Bone had been connected on liquidity pools. Bone has been in a chaotic mess. Leash, this issue here. And I said Shib's next. Shib's price is at all-time low and dwindling. And then people were looking and seeing that a lot of the burn activity had dwindled. I don't really care about the burn activity. What I do care about is the root cause of why the burn activity went down, which is a liquidity crisis at points that told some analysis tools that what we're seeing is that a lot of the Shib that's out there is largely in leverage trading. In other words, that there's not a lot of direct, peer-to-peer, decentralized. There's not a lot of real activity. There's not a lot of true activity and interest. And when the leash situation happened, they were doing some updates talking about a V2. And I covered some of the posts on Caldaria. He did a blog, and that was back in October. Well, that blog hasn't been updated since October. There's been I just looked today. There's been no update since October. Maybe they're doing something in a Discord somewhere, but I know they said that they were going to be pushing communications to public sites like their own and the blog and the newsletter. The newsletter just gives a bunch of fluff crap that nobody cares about. So I assume, I don't know, but I assume that things are not good in the leadership side of the whole Shibarium ecosystem, which might be a reason that Shytoshi scented book stepped down in the first place. Because back in March, he went silent. He went radio silent, dead silent. Nobody knew what happened. Even Lucy, and I'll get to that in a second, had questioned what the hell's going on, but he's probably ahead of us or whatever. The whole scented book thing he did, and then everybody was questioning what's going on. And I speculated, not having any evidence, I speculated, because I'm op-ed, it's what I do, that perhaps, just like with Kuma Inu, we were hitting that point where these leaders were going to start taking money and leaving. That was all speculation. I don't know. Fast forward, I had to give you the preface because some people may not have been following this because they're not online all the time. You got lives, you got jobs, job, you got kids, you got things that matter, not this crypto crap. However, I've wanted to at least kind of catch you up that the Shib ecosystem has been in a chaotic mess for a very long time. Very recently, and I want to say this was a couple months back. So the story with this K9 finance business, March 2024 is when the thing showed up, and it was going to be an official project on Shibarium. And I didn't go deep into everything that it was going to be doing. The important points is that it was it was a validator. It had its own token or has its own token. It has a DAO. It has all this framework, but it was supposed to be offering these types of, real products that were going to be powered by Shibarium, which people thought would add strength to Shibarium as a use case by having at least one that was proving out Shibarium as a blockchain, as a viable blockchain. That was at least the thought process back then. So there was a lot of hype and everything. And then they put out an announcement that said Shytoshi scented book and Caldaria, who from what I could tell, Carl is still in charge as of now. I don't know, because again, the blog has been dead since October. But these two were going to be, advisors or whatever on their board or something for this K9. Now, when I looked at that, I figured that was sketchy. I think the community thought it was a good thing. I didn't think it's a good thing because when you think about, I have this product over here. Let me give you a good analogy here. Could you imagine if the government entities that created the freeway infrastructure, the original freeway infrastructure, if you could think that on that government agency that oversaw the construction of the freeway, you took two people who were in high authority in that government agency and you put them on the board for Ford. That rhymes. Can you imagine the conflict of interest there? Think about it, right? I'm building a freeway infrastructure for your cars, and I'm going to take these people who are in charge of everything it takes to make that freeway happen, including safety, including number of lanes, etc. And I'm going to take them and put them on the board for Ford. And we say, now these people are guiding or advising or directing or whatever they're doing for the very cars that are going to ride on the freeway. What's going to happen? Naturally, you're going to have some sort of influence over the direction of the freeway system. Then what happens? Means the freeway system is aligned towards one bias, which is in that let's say cars, right? And not trucks and not bikes and not buses, right? You're not thinking in everybody's interest. You're thinking in your interest. Now, if we take that analogy or any variant of that analogy, you can flip it. You can do the same thing. You can flip it around. You could say, okay, Ford has all these people we build out a car infrastructure, and then they're the ones in charge of building out a freeway. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter which way you go. If you take that analogy or any variant of it and you cross-reference it against this over here, it's the same kind of risk. You should not have these people advising a project that's going to be on your blockchain because you're creating a conflict of interest. So when I saw that happen, I didn't, because I hadn't followed the eco deeper. I was a whale in bone. Not now, but at the time I was a whale in bone, but I still didn't follow some of this other crap. Mine was to say, back then, Shibarium's not going to go anywhere. Shibarium needs to do something or it's not going to go anywhere. As in, you're going to have to figure out how to get people to use it, was kind of my stance on it. I didn't really care what that was. I did say that you got some hard times and competition is going to be very steep against you. And I felt like they were leaning hard on notoriety, not necessarily credibility. There's an important difference and value in credibility versus notoriety. And we can align this to Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift has credibility only as far as music, period. She has notoriety on a wider scale, right? She's been seen with the presidents. She's performed worldwide. She's put out label She does nonprofit. So she has notoriety on a wider scale, but only credibility in music. She might share an opinion about politics. She doesn't have credibility because she hasn't been in it. She hasn't done political science, etc. Right? So same thing applies. If you do not have credibility for the topic or whatever the subject matter is, it's going to be harder for you to make a case that people should buy into what you're doing or buy into your product. Nobody in this had any sort of credibility outside of basics of cryptocurrency. Shib was basics of, by their own admission, basics of cryptocurrency. It didn't do anything. It didn't have reflections. It didn't have any of these pieces. Those were added on by third-party entities, the yield farm things, and the ability to transact at the Welly Burger, whatever the hell that is. And these were third-party interactions that any crypto could have done. They used notoriety to sell you on Shibarium being the future without the framework to ensure that it was going to be. There's strong parallels with this and BlockDAG, because BlockDAG's doing the same thing. They're using, though, people that have credibility, and they're saying that because we have credibility in these topics, we're going to be successful over here. But none of the people on this have ever led this kind of a project. None of the people like this have ever led a DAG. None of the people on this talking block DAG, none of the people on this have ever contributed to this degree to a pre-sale of this size. They lack credibility. Because they lack credibility, they must be questioned. Such is the case then with Shib. When Shytoshi put out the scented book, people were questioning, maybe this is not the guy. I've been telling you that for years, that he wasn't the guy. I've been telling you that for years, that you were following. When I did the Laker coverage, it's the God complex again, just like with Idiot Vidlik. You're following people who happen to achieve something at one point in time. Outside of that one point in time success, they have not been able to deliver. That's true. If we look at what's going on with Shib, the token, Shib still doesn't do anything. Nothing was achieved beyond it. People can call out the Shibverse and, doggy dow and all this crap. That's crypto bubble. Back to K9 Finance. Shibarium gets breached. The breach was around the bridge. The bridge used bone. The bridge gets breached. By way of the breach, K9 gets affected, its own tokens as well as other tokens that are part of this. The Shib team chose not to do a bounty. This is what I'm reading. Chose not to do a bounty. The K9 team put out a document that basically says, this was essentially, I paraphrase, this was unacceptable. We have to do right by our people, and we need answers. We need truth, and we want everybody made whole. And we're challenging the Shib team to make them whole. It was around that time that Daria went silent on the blog. We haven't seen anything from Call. Now, I don't know what that means. I'm sharing op-ed, so don't come at me. I'm documenting the journey, which is what we must do. If people do not speak that can, you all lose. So I'm documenting the journey. You can come back and reference it. We can learn from this. If there are legal actions from it, mine might actually even be referenced to try to help find additional information to catch the scammers. Okay, that's why I do what I do. I'm a source of information. I can't verify all of it because that's my beef with Telescam. A lot of this information, they purposely hide it in those channels because they know it's harder to get and trace and easy to delete. That's why they do that. That's why I'm against Telescam. That's why I like credible projects to put it public. If you're legit, you'll put it public on your site, on something that doesn't require login, that's not locked behind shit. If you're locking it behind shit, I'm going to question your legitimacy. K9 has a forum, forum.k9finance.com. And on the forum, a person a week ago put a very lengthy post. And this is my wrap up here. And they were talking about what happened. And these are people, most, I would argue all the K9 people are people that were largely Shib people. And then they saw K9 and they saw an opportunity to be that catalyst for Shibarium. That was their support, is this might help Shibarium. K9 seemed to have created its own community within itself, which is good. And this forum is public, which is good. And I get the sense that at least at the time, certain of the K9 leadership had the best intentions. I think the mistake number one they made was adding Shytoshi's Senate book and Call as advisors to their whatever. I think that was a critical mistake that they shouldn't have done. I think they should have stayed independent. It reminds me of Ryoshi Vision, old school. This too close. You're too close on that. Ryoshi Vision, Unification Fund, too close. Like all of these, they keep doing. And then K9 did the whole, we're going to burn 400 trillion tokens like who Vitalik did. Stop. Stop. Well, these people, we're inspired by them, so we're going to do this. Stop. Create your own thing and then do your own thing independent of them. Stand on your own. Stop hooking into these people. Stop creating God complexes. I argue, as op-ed I am, that them doing that contributed to them getting breached. The breach was not their fault. I'm saying that them doing those decisions, because think about it. If you put Shytoshi scented book and call Daria on the board, what's to say that they did not steer you into decisions that made the breach worse? What's to say that they did not steer you into making decisions that exposed you to the risk in the first place? Something to think about. Once again, I don't have the data. I'm saying it was already a risk that you put them in front to begin with because they were on the inside. And Shytoshi ain't been seen since, and now call's gone quiet. After Leash, where they told you, including Shytoshi and call, that Leash was, they killed the rebase, it's not going to rebase, then it turns on, then they tell you it was a one-time thing, which wasn't true. They lied to you multiple times. You made the mistake, to K9, you made the mistake of the God complex, of following God complex on these idiots. That was your mistake. You still could have been on Shibarium, but you should have insulated yourself from risk. Don't trust like that. Like all these other, you didn't learn from Ryoshi Vision. You didn't learn from Unification Fund. Here we are. So this person, I'm not going to read what they said, but bottom line, they're expressing disappointment with what happened. I wanted to just simply go down some of the bullets of the action plan of what they were talking about. First, they were concerned about the downplay of what happened with Shibarium's breach, as well as the Leash issue. They were being downplayed, yes, by the Shib team themselves. We're downplaying both situations. They downplayed the Shibarium breach. It's a one-time deal. We reached out to the developer. They downplay. Hey, can we just move on? Same thing that BlockDAG does. With the Leash deal, they said it's a one-time thing. That's FUD. There's a tweet. I read it. It's straight up. I documented. They're telling you this is FUD and it's a one-time thing. Again, at the time, the supply was 150,000 tokens. We're now at, I think it's high side of 4 billion tokens. So it was not a one-time thing. It's printing every day. So they lied to you, is the point. Multiple lies have been told to you. This is why I come at certain people about BlockDAG, because you got to understand that that lying is consistent in crypto. They all do it, which is why I like them putting it public, because it's showing trust. You're showing trust if you just put it public and say this is what it is, right? Here's our tokenomics. Here's who owns what. Here's who's doing what. If you're willing to do that public, I'm likely to trust you a little bit more than when you're hiding in silence like some of these. Point is that even the Shib ecosystem has been lying to you, just like BlockDAG does. It's possible. I don't know that is underneath Shib to some degree. I don't know that is. I'm saying that look at the parallels. Look at the parallels in lies. So then they're talking about, look, at the end of the day, Shibarium should have been a good thing. It's not a good thing. We have to get some better stuff here. Some of the points he was talking about in terms of public facing and accusations, right? Apparently, the Shib team has been making accusations against K9, which that it doesn't surprise me, but it disappoints me. But apparently the Shib team, so when I say Shib team, there's a couple of names I'll call out here in a second, but the Shib team has been making some accusations, improper accusations. So pointing fingers, right? Blame game. We know what it is. They get caught with their pants down, Vaseline outside. They're trying to look for scapegoats, right? So this person is saying, well, we got to stop that business and we need to have evidence of anything that's happening. I don't disagree. They're talking about decentralization because the breach itself came because one of the, what I was told is that one of the validators had sufficient voting authority. So this kind of goes to Luna Classic and concerns Blees raised about how many validators have so much power. In this case, what was stated is that one validator had so much voting power, they were able to pass a proposal that was malicious. And then the malicious proposal went in, which enabled the breach. And the question was that validator on the inside of the malicious proposal? I don't know. My question is, how is it possible that whatever that code was that was malicious was never screened? So even if you pass it through DAO, you can't just implement malicious code. That's unthinkable. So the questions are being asked of, number one, that validator having so much power. Number two, how can malicious code be injected that way with no due diligence? And what they're saying is we need to have documentation of decentralization of the validators in custody. We need to make sure that there's no capability for single person control. So essentially mitigate the risk that any one validator can bring the thing down, or risk of 51% attacks, or et cetera. And then documentation of chain upgrade authority and governance and who can do it, right? Because who is the one that's actually pushing this stuff, and why are they authorized, and document all that. You would ask the question then, well, why wouldn't we always have that, right? And that's what you should be asking. These are things fundamental that should always have been there. The flaw, as Binance stuff has called out, is you hear, well, we're audited. And they say that's good enough, that the auditors would have caught those things and the auditors would know that data. That's not their job. You, as an investor, it's your job really to oversee and ensure that they're doing the things that are going to be fundamentally, appropriate for the chain. If you're not holding them accountable, it's on you, because you're the one that gave them the money in the first place. People on social media have been conditioned not to take accountability. So when I told you I was a whale in bone, and then I told you I was not, right? And I'm not, a damn sure I'm not. That's because that's my accountability. That's me holding them accountable. That is me saying, I don't trust you with my money, right? And then I do coverage as op-ed. Some of it, it's documented, but some of it's op-ed. That's my accountability. That's me holding them accountable, saying, I don't trust you with this much money anymore. Do I still have some bone? I think I got 2. And the only reason I have 2 is to watch price movement so I can do coverage on it. That's about it. I don't have confidence in it. I haven't since I dumped out, which was a long time ago. And I didn't buy back in. Even when it dipped, like this is one of those where I'm like, I've said bone should be way higher, but that assumes certain fundamentals that aren't there. Bone being tied to those, Shytoshi NFTs on the liquidity side, that's chaos. Bone being tied to leash on liquidity, that's chaos. You're creating a house of cards. It's essentially a fancy pyramid scheme, house of cards, where things are tied to this and tied to this and tied to this, and the whole thing was going to crash. That's what we're seeing. And that's what the person's talking about. At the end of the day, there's no documentation of, if somebody pushes a malicious code, like let's say the house of cards was fine. I don't suggest it's a good thing. I'm saying, let's say it was stable until you push this code. He's saying, well, let's document who has the authority to do that and why they have the authority to do that, and have transparency into who's doing what when, to try to connect the dots to the, this validator that had too much authority to be able to push it through, is what they're basically saying. Well, I got a couple of concerns with what they're saying. I don't disagree conceptually, but I got a couple of concerns with what they're saying. When they say, essentially, standard must be evidence around public facing, and we're tossing around the word FUD, and I want to clarify that FUD is false information designed to harm a thing. So if you say something, it has to be provably false in order to be FUD. We shouldn't use FUD. They're using FUD because they're in the bubble. We should call out where there are unsubstantiated claims. An unsubstantiated claim is not FUD. It's a claim made. It's a statement made. It's an observation. We should always make observations. We should always make claims, even if they're unsubstantiated, so long as we frame it as, well, allegedly, apparently, or this is what I'm seeing here, and we're providing analysis about it. The reason that's critical is because if we don't call it out, others may not know that's there. There's too much assumption about what people know or what people see or what people have access to. All of this relies on word of mouth. We can't provide the proof because some of these people are very good about hiding their tracks, which is why I don't like Telescam. So, since they're good at hiding their tracks, we must treat it like a puzzle. Each of us has a piece of the puzzle. You take all the pieces of the puzzle, you connect it, and a picture starts to form. The picture, once it's clear enough, will be recognizable by somebody who has the inside knowledge and the ethics and morals to expose what's going on. And then you get the last piece of it. That's how this works. So if my message to you, I support people talking about these kinds of situations. You must do. It is our obligation. If we want to clean it up, we must talk about these things. What you shouldn't do is accuse without evidence, right? So in this case, I can't say that Shytoshi Sent It book definitely took your money and ran. What I said was Shytoshi scented book, went up on the stage, tried to convince you to buy a cologne scented book when people were expecting talk about the blockchain. Later, he drops out of the project, just says he's done enough and he's moving on. When it's in a state of chaos, Call takes over. Then what happens? Bone starts to crash down. Then Leash starts to print out of control. Everything's crashing and burning only after Shytoshi leaves. We take pieces of the puzzle, we try to piece them together, and it should form a picture. That picture is what I said to you way back before Shibarium launched, which was, this better be rock solid stable. And if you have any issues, even small ones, you're toast. I have that episode. I'll figure it and I'll link it on this one where I predicted it. I'm not Nostradamus. This is basic. Shibarium was always the center because that's what they did. They were trying to slip Shibarium in under Bone and Leash, this house of cards I described. They were trying to slip it in underneath there as the foundation, as the support for all this. That's why they keep saying that these are important to the eco, because they were trying to use that money to support what they were trying to do down here, and then use that to support the house of cards. And it wasn't going to work if they made even one mistake, which is why I wasn't really supporting them doing this. Well, then now, fast forward, and we are in this breach of Shibarium, which is after a separate breach. There was some sort of an exchange, some sort of a DEX on Shibarium that got breached. There's multiple of these breaches over time, and people are starting to question, what do we do now? Which is a good question to ask. But there's a lot of feedback that talks about, and this is where I'll get into the team. People are starting to think that the internal team of Shib is the problem. Well, of course. So some people say Lucy, she's on social media, should be, I would think it's pretty much universal. People think Lucy should be fired. Mazriel, I don't know Mazriel. I've seen the name, don't know Mazriel. They think that apparently he's some sort of a mod something. It's something about Shib Eternity. I don't even know what that is, but they think he should be fired. They want Shytoshi scented book and called Daria to publicly apologize for what's going on. And they called out that they want Shytoshi. I guarantee you're not going to hear shit from Shytoshi. You're not hearing anything from Shytoshi. But all of these different people, they want him fired out of there. I don't disagree. I think it's a good start. Public from those two, I doubt it. Especially not Shytoshi scented book. I don't think you're going to have it. But also, minimum, this was one of the statements, minimum standard of evidence that should apply when public accusations are made. And they say a legal document from a lawyer. That's not sustainable. It's not sustainable, because what you're saying is all you're going to do is saddle the legal system with a bunch of frivolous complaints. That's not sustainable. To me, it's simple. Okay. If you're making an accusation, which I said is the more serious deal, if you want to say that Shytoshi scented book rug pulled you, that's an accusation, right? If you want to say that, there's one easy standard with that. The easy standard is you have to prove intent. You have to prove that Shytoshi scented book did something that caused the loss of wealth and then benefited him or them. That's what you must do. That's why I say do rug pull, aka Do Kwon, and I say rug pulled it. Because what did he do? Do rug pull made a decision that financially benefited him. He didn't walk away broke. It financially benefited him. Now, once we understand our minimum standard, it's easy to connect the dots. So again, if you're going to accuse Shytoshi scented book, you have to have some sort of proof or evidence that he did something, they did something that financially benefited them to your detriment. Most can't prove that because the dude or lady, chances are it's a dude based on the body build, assuming it's the same person, was hiding behind a mask, the scented book thing, the presentation using AI. That person was very good at hiding everything that they were doing. So the only person who possibly could expose Shytoshi scented book would be somebody physically near Shytoshi scented book. We know the list of, I think it was about 5 people who were in any proximity to who we suspect is Shytoshi scented book. And you're like, well, how do you know that? Find that list. They put photos. They were photos of these people. So this is why I say this whole business is shady, right? There were photos of all of these key people, and those people were at the top of the meme coin situation, which I speculate is the reason we did not have a quote meme coin rush to the same significant degree as 2021. Because I speculate, this is speculation, that those people, they're trying to kind of go into the background. And many of them are probably just focusing on Ethereum and Bitcoin at this point, and they're staying away from the meme space because they were getting too exposed. Keyed off of the Medium article about Leica and that person saying that they had information that these same shady people were at the top of Leica, and then conversely Shib and Kuma and all these other ones. My speculation is it's always been the same group of people sitting at the top of a bunch of memes that basically created a very fancy Ponzi scheme where they were taking profits from each one, spinning up additional ones, and all underneath that was the Shib deal. And when all those other ones started dying, because almost all of them now are dead, when all the rest of them started dying, the Ponzi starts to fail. Consider, if we go that speculation route, if we take this wide-eyed theory, and it's only a theory because I don't have docs, but if we take that theory and we say the only time that Shib started truly failing, it took the demise of, Kishu and Floki. Floki's still around, but it's failing, right? Floki and Kishu and Satama and Safe Moon and all these other memes at the time, when the vast majority of them went kaputs, all of a sudden Shib no longer has the strength. All of a sudden Shib cannot hold the line. All of a sudden multiple in the ecosystem start to crash and burn. We can possibly say that Shib was being supplanted by some of these other ones that were being marketed and pushed from underneath. Again, picture in your mind a house of cards where it's being built from the bottom. I don't have any evidence, folks. All I'm going to say is, as op-ed that I am, we must speak on these things. We must make statements, and we must theorizing is perfectly fine. Speculating is perfectly fine. Drawing lines is perfectly fine, because you can't explain it any other way. You can't. Shib's height, it was surrounded by other memes that were, successful, quote. That's where it peaked. That's where it was at the highest. Where was it at the lowest? When there was no other competition. I would argue same as Doge, if we're honest, but I don't think Doge is that same scammy business. I think the vast majority is really going to be what's going on with Shib as linked to all these other tokens that eventually went kaputs. So for anybody in K9, whether you're in the community or in the leadership, I will continue op-ed, but I'm not going to do it on a frequent basis because I think you already have a good handle on what's happened, and you already have a good handle on what needs to happen next. I wanted to share because some people may not, because they don't follow this shit, because it's so in-depth and so convoluted, as many scams are. And I don't suggest K9 is. I'm talking this overall about Shibarium and Shib, etc. I think the big picture here is that, no, this is just chaos. It's chaos. Born from a select group of people who are physically in proximity to one another, that are aware of each other, and they're aware of what they did, and they use that money to go off and get Bitcoin and Ethereum and other things, and left a whole bunch of people high and dry. That's at least my theory about what may have happened to the Shib ecosystem. So what's next? My theory, and it's only a theory on this one, I think Shib I think Shib is going to spike again randomly. Like, I think there's going to be this major influx of money that doesn't make any sense. I think it's going to spike again. I think then you're going to start seeing the leadership show up again, talking about that everything's back on track prior to what will eventually be the demise of the project. I think we're going to have another mysterious pump on Shib before it fails, is my theory.